So, Jim, for me, I hear constantly that business owners are intimidated by private equity. That doesn't bother me at all. It's a business deal. We're negotiating with business people. What you do, candidly, scares the hell out of me because there are criminal penalties associated with doing it incorrectly. So explain to people why. And I am going to use my own language. I'm not attributing this language to you. Do not do this yourself. You're out of your freaking mind if you try to do this yourself. Explain to people why I feel that way, Jim.
No, exactly right. I mean, I call this my sandbox. I keep a very small sandbox, and this is all I do. I mean, for more than 3 decades, I've been doing these kind of transactions. I don't do wills and trusts. I don't litigate things like that because it is so specialized, and because the penalties to the company, the potential penalties to me also are severe. Anytime that I get involved in the transaction, there's potential liability for me to be associated with the transaction, to prepare the documents, to assist in it. So and again, that can be everything from financial penalties to on my side of the table, if they determine that I've done things improperly, I could lose my license, and I kind of like having my license. So so you make sure it's done right. But
Jim, question that I get all the time because Nicola and I interact with people who have capital to invest. A question I get all the time, this is separate and apart from an IPO now, is who can raise capital and who needs to be an accredited, broker dealer. Explain that process. So, I'm an average guy and I come across a friend of mine who invests in companies and he says to me while we're playing golf, Dave, if you find me somebody to invest in, I'll pay you a finder's fee. Immediately, because I live in South Florida, my radar goes up and I'm like, finder's fee, that sounds like something that might be shady. When is it shady? When is it not shady? Who can raise money? Who can't, Jim?
Well, Dave, that is a wonderful question, and that literally comes up all the time here. In particular, like you were saying, here, for some reason in South Florida, I'm sure it comes up other places as well. But in long story short, there is no there's no legal concept of the finder. It's not permissible. I mean, the only type of recipient of a commission is someone who's a registered broker dealer. And like I said, I hear it all the time. Also, my buddy Joe, he raised money for something and he got a commission for it. It doesn't matter. And it's not just an individual. Also, the commission. If I have a company and I'm raising capital, I'm trying to raise capital for that, and I want to go to somebody else to raise that capital. I need to be hiring a registered broker dealer. That's a business that has specific licenses, okay, with the Financial Industry Regulatory Association and other areas that allow them to legally get that commission. It's not going to my buddy Joe. It's not going to somebody who used to work at a place like that who now does it on their own. Those people, none of them have the proper licenses. And it doesn't matter what you call it. Some people call it a consulting fee, or if there's the finder's fee. Obviously, we can come up with whatever euphemism we want, but it's not legal. And that has direct legal issues for both the company as well as the person who's doing this, because if in Florida in particular, there's actually laws that invalidate the offering if you're doing that. So you've automatically violated the securities laws. And then with that, to correct it, you have to go back and offer all of these investors the right to have their money back. That's part of the process of correcting this. So, if the company doesn't have that money, the regulators are going to be, coming and looking for somebody to pay that bill. And they can fine, there can be, again, civil and criminal penalties for the officers and directors of the company as part of this. They can be prohibited from raising a capital in the future. And the person who was the finder, the person who got the commission, thinks they're staying out on the golf course, like you're saying, because they just put an extra X dollars in their pocket. They're on the hook to repay them also. So it's bad for everybody, and it does happen all the time. The example that I give, because a lot of times people say, oh, again, my buddy Joe did this. I mean, he didn't have a problem. What's the issue? I say, every day we're driving on I-95 and there's someone ripping down the road, right? And they're going there and they might be going 100. They're going whatever, X. They're definitely violating the law whether or not they get caught. If they get caught, there's, big penalties, big ramifications. If they didn't that time, they get lucky, but this is even worse because, if they're speeding that one time and they stop, then, it's kind of done at that point, and no one later on is going to say, hey, such and such was speeding down the highway yesterday. In the securities area, that's staying out there. And if you have any, the regulators learn about the issue, you have an investor who's disgruntled because they didn't make enough money on this, and they report it somehow to a regulatory authority, or the regulatory just starts checking on their own, because you do have to do certain filings with these agencies, and they learn of this, everything goes upside down. So it's definitely something you should never do.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot with business owners, just because, and this is for anyone who would be doing something like this, just because you've done this a bunch of times and nothing happened does not mean it isn't going to. Right. And here, that risk is so high and the consequences are so high that it should never be worth that. So I really want to emphasize that, because all it takes is one time. I mean, essentially what you're doing is engaging in the practice of securities without a license. So right. You will be brought before those authorities, and you will have to, speak to what you did, and there will be consequences associated with that.
Right. That's precisely right, Nikki. And it's, and like I said, that hangs out there. It's not like just because the deal's done, you're okay. So, years can go by and something, someone, has issues with it.
It's exactly the kind of thing a really smart lawyer is going to look for and is going to find if their client wants to unwind the deal. Right. It is exactly the kind of thing that a lawyer is going to find. They will find, I promise you, I've worked with lawyers long enough to tell you, a really smart lawyer will find this.
And I actually found that for a client. I represent people who are putting money to work in deals also, and do the review of their contracts, investigations. And I actually found that situation for a client a couple years ago, and the company had used an unlicensed finder for this, and ultimately we went to the regulators with it. So and it's
well, so you actually then have an obligation as a member of the bar. If you see that, you have an obligation then to report it, correct?
Right.
I just had something else that we sort of touched on it in our discussion about, if you don't do things right, it can get picked up along the way, especially in due diligence. I wanted to ask about that in the M&A context, because not just in an IPO context, but in the M&A context, if you were out and you were raising capital and you didn't do things in the up and up, and something gets revealed during the M&A due diligence process, that could be a problem for you as well, right, Jim?
Absolutely. It's the same ramification. The buyer is going to say, we want you to correct this, because they don't want to come in and pick up, potential liability hanging over them. It can lead to them being nervous about other problems and things that mistakes that you've made along the way. And, and again, it's, that time it takes to correct these, puts the deal in jeopardy. So time kills deals. So you may end up losing that buyer.